So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of the Multicoloured Tanager tour, and we are the tour itself is focused on this area in Colombia. The Andean range in the south of Colombia splits into three ranges: the Western Andes, the Central Andes, and Colombia's Eastern Andes. And this particular tour is focused on the Central and Western Andes of Colombia. So we kick off with a direct flight from London Heathrow into Bogota, and we connect on to a city called Pereira, which is in Colombia's Central Andes, perched at around 1,500 meters. We'll no doubt grab a coffee, and then we're going to get straight into the birding. We're going to be birding a wonderful reserve called Otonquimbaya, which is on the outskirts, well, about half an hour outside of Pereira. And there's a wonderful track covered on either side by luxuriant cloud forest. And we're going to start by looking for some kind of classic Andean sort of species like this torrent duck. And we'll hopefully get into some of the early endemic targets, including the likes of this caucaguan, a bird that's very rare, but here in Otonquimbaya it occurs in good numbers, so we have a really good chance of seeing this stunning bird. Another key target of the reserve is red ruff fruit crow, a large cotinga, and we stand really good chances of this bird in our first few days of the tour. So having got into the birding in Otun, we're going to reposition north to Manizales, where we're going to spend a couple of nights in a hotel, which fringes lovely cloud forest habitat. And we can start enjoying species like Andean motmot and masked trogon just in the grounds of the hotel itself. And then the following day, we're going to head over to a reserve called Rio Blanco, which is about 40-minute drive from the hotel. It's a real classic, reserve and a classic day's birding here in Colombia. There's lovely hummingbird gardens around the Lodge HQ, where we can see the likes of long-tailed sylph. Throughout the tour, the hummingbird diversity is kind of really incredible. We can hope for as many as perhaps 40 species throughout the tour, a few of which I've highlighted later on in the presentation. But Rio Blanco is really one of the real kind of highlights of birding this reserve is the chance to see a number of antpitter species. Antpitters are a family of birds that are very furtive. They live on the forest floor, and they're generally really difficult to see. But as you can see here in this slide, there's a chap here, one of the reserve wardens. These guys are kind of like antpitter whisperers. And with gentle whistles and the promise of an earthworm or two, they coax antpitters out of their kind of forest layers. And we can see as many as 4 species when we're here in Rio Blanco, including the spectacular chestnut-crowned antpitter. There's also the endemic brown-banded antpitter, bicolored antpitter, and slate-crowned antpitter. So this is one of the real highlights of birding here in Rio Blanco is these antpitter species. We'll also be hoping to get into mixed species flocks across the cloud forest trails of the reserve, and they often include the likes of crimson-mantled woodpecker and pearl tree runner, and if we're lucky, we may come across white-capped tanager throughout our day's birding here in Rio Blanco. There's great views from the reserve. This is a picture looking back down to the city of Manizales. And so that's Rio Blanco. It's, as I say, it's a real classic of Colombian birding. We've made a number of changes to the tour recently, and one of those changes is the inclusion of a new reserve called Hacienda El Bosque, which is some 20 minutes away from our hotel. And we spend a full morning there. It's a working cattle ranch, cattle farm, dairy farm. And the owner's son has taken it upon himself to protect cloud forest in the reserve. He started sort of offering the chance to go and visit. They have a number of fruit feeders which attract the likes of these hooded mountain tanagers. And sword-billed hummingbird is really common in the reserve as well. Another real classic hummingbird of the Andes. Again, we have the chance of a couple of species of antpitter, perhaps the real prize being this crescent-faced antpitter, a bird that's really, really tough to see, perhaps with the only exception of Hacienda del Bosque. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that we can find this bird on our morning's birding here. The fruit feeders also attract the spectacular grey-breasted mountain toucan. And yeah, I think it's a great inclusion in the tour. From there, we're going to reposition after 2 nights spent just outside Manizales. We're going to reposition and move upslope into the higher reaches of the Central Andes, into the Parque Nacional Natural Los Nevados, which is a national park named after this spectacular volcano, which is at the center of the park. It's a really incredible place to bird. We're going to spend a full afternoon and the following full morning, and perhaps a little extra time after lunch birding in this region. So we bird a number of different habitats: high cloud forest and elfin forest, and right into the heart of the reserve we'll be up in this special habitat known as Paramo, which is a neotropical savanna which occurs above the tree line. We're anywhere above around 3,500 meters here, but thanks to Colombia's proximity to the equator, we're not in the snow. And we'll get into some really spectacular birds up in these high altitude regions, including scarlet-bellied mountain tanager, many-striped canastero, and if we're lucky, we might have a flyby of Andean condor. And then there's more endemic targets whilst we're up in these high altitude regions, including the diminutive and quite tricky, actually, rufous-fronted parakeet, as well as perhaps the prized target here, another hummingbird, which only occurs above around 3,600 meters. This is the wonderful and charismatic Buffy helmet crest. So we'll be hoping to get good views of this spectacular little hummer. Our night here is spent in a great hotel called Termales de Ruiz. As you can see, there's a pool out to the left of the hotel in shot here, and there's actually a couple more out of shot to the right. These pools they're fed by naturally occurring geothermal hot springs. So after a full day's birding, you can take a glass of wine or a beer and sit in these pools and just kind of luxuriate in these wonderful surroundings. In the foreground here, you can see shrubs, and this is the edge of a hummingbird garden that overlooks the hotel. And we can find species like rainbow-bearded thornbill, mountain velvet-breast, and several other wonderful hummers up in these high altitude zones. So that's kind of the start or the first half of the tour we spend in Colombia's Central Andes. And then the second half of the tour, we're going to cross over from the Central Andes, cross over the Cauca Valley and the Cauca River into the Western Andes. Here we're going to be based for 3 nights in the wonderful Montezuma Rainforest Lodge. This was another change that Andy and I made to the tour. We've added a 3rd night here, and for me, this is perhaps the best birding location in Colombia for the first-time visitor. Colombia, as I'm sure many of you know, Colombia has more species of birds, or recorded species of birds, than any other country in the world. And the lodge list here, which includes the road that runs into the national park, the adjacent park, is upwards of 600 species. So it's mind-bogglingly biodiverse. This is one of the most biodiverse regions in the world. And we're going to spend 3 nights birding in this incredible location. So the national park that we bird is called Tatamá. And and it's a spectacular location. We bird in 4x4 vehicles, so we leave the lodge very early in the morning and we head up into the mountains. So the first full day we go right up to the top, up here, more spectacular views, and we'll get right into some special endemic species up here, including chestnut-breasted flower piercer, and there's the likes of Munchiki wood wren up here as well. So we across the course of our 3 nights, we're going to bird this long road, which covers an altitudinal gradient of around 1,000 meters. So over the course of our stay, we'll hit all those different altitudinal zones, which have their own specific species at each point. So as we come down, we'll come into the likes of purplish mantled tanager, and one of the most spectacular hummingbirds, I think, velvet purple coronet. Moving down, the targets really come thick and fast. There's no real let up. We have the likes of orange-breasted fruit eater. There's a chance for black solitaire, a tough target, but nevertheless we have a good chance of seeing this magnificent Choco special. There's wonderful plant life as we go down, particularly represented by spectacular orchids. The orchid diversity here is really off the charts. And yeah, it's just a spectacular place to bird. We will have had a picnic breakfast up at the top, and then halfway through the day, we'll make a stop and have a picnic lunch delivered to us along the trail. So we'll sit and have a picnic lunch. This is Andy back in the day on his tour here, when he originally set up the tour, I think back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And no doubt there'll be a spectacular view adjoining our picnic lunch spot. There's a couple of really special tanagers here in the reserve, both belonging to the genus Banksia. This is black and gold tanager, and perhaps the most emblematic bird of the reserve. This is gold ring tanager. So we stand great chances of seeing both these species. They're actually pretty straightforward, to be honest. Over the time that we have in the reserve, we'll almost certainly get those species. Back at the lodge, there's spectacular hummingbird gardens. There's somewhere in the region of 15, 16 species of hummingbirds alone in the garden. So photographers will be in their element. It's a great place just to spend a little bit of time. And we get the likes of Rufous-gaped hillstar. And if we're lucky, we might get a visit from a tyra. This is in the species, in the family of mustelids. They're often trying to take fruit from the fruit feeders. Right, so that takes us to the last couple of nights of the tour. So from Montezuma, we're going to head south. We're still in Colombia's Western Andes. We're going to spend the last couple of days in a lodge called Araucana, which lies to the west of Cali, which is one of the largest cities in Colombia. And this location gives us further access to Colombia, to the Pacific slope of the Western Andes, and this incredibly biodiverse region. So it's a great spot to finish off. It's the most well-appointed lodge on the tour. Within the gardens, we can see common species like crimson rump toucanet, saffron crown tanager, and there's a few special near endemics like bar-crested antshrike and spectacled parrotlet. And then over the time that we spend here, we'll visit a number of reserves close to the lodge, which attract more spectacular species like these rufous-throated tanagers and silvery-throated tanagers. So yeah, it's just a real kind of an explosion of color in these Western Andes, and it's a great way to round off the tour. There's more like emblematic species like toucan barbet and golden-headed quetzal. And if we're really lucky, we might even run into ornate hawk eagle. There's a couple of breeding pairs in the region. And then, yeah, finally we come to the bird in question itself, the multicolored tanager, after which the tour is named. Yeah, one of the most spectacular birds of the region, and an endemic to Colombia, and perhaps one of the most sought after endemics of the whole country. Thankfully, it's pretty straightforward. We bird in a spot called Kilometer 18, and in particular a reserve called La Florida. We spend the whole day in the area, and to date, every tour has seen this bird, and they're pretty straightforward. I think we couldn't name the tour after multicolored tanager if we dipped on this species. So it's a great way to finish up the tour. And just to end, I'm going to give a few bonus slides. A lot of people who come over, they like to combine tours. So we have the multicolored tanager tour and also Santa Marta endemics. And as the name suggests, it's a tour full of endemic species, which can be combined with that multicolored tanager tour. It's up in Colombia's northern Caribbean region. We do shorebirding and bird dry scrub habitat for the likes of vermilion cardinal. And then we get into the Santa Marta Mountains themselves for Santa Marta woodstar. These are all endemic species coming up pretty much. Black cheek mountain tanager, recently changed its name from Santa Marta mountain tanager. The regionally endemic white-tipped quetzal, white-tailed star frontlet, and the endemic targets just keep coming thick and fast. This is Santa Marta screech owl, a rare owl that we can hopefully find. It was only described in, I think, 2015. So yeah, that's for those that want to make the most of the long journey over to Colombia. You have the chance to combine these two tours. But if you're only going for one and you've never visited Colombia before, then the multicolored tanager tour is a great option, and I hope to see you over here in Colombia birding soon.